Administrator and the Assistant Secretary. We have lots more questions we'll submit for the record, but let me, as well as you leave, commend your public service. This is very difficult work that the complexity of which I'm not sure I can understand or appreciate, and I'm sure that's widely shared, but we're grateful for your commitment. We'll stay in touch with you, and we'll leave the record open for members to submit questions, and we're just grateful for your time and your appearance here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for holding the hearing.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate your support.
Thank you. We'll transition now because we want to hear from His Excellency Antonio Guterres, who's the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, and he's appearing to provide a briefing. He's appearing as a courtesy to provide us a briefing on the situation in Syria, and we're grateful for his presence. We know his time is limited, but we're honored that he's here in his second term as High Commissioner, and someone who has served Portugal as a Prime Minister, and a person of great experience, and someone who has dedicated now years to the good work that's done by the United Nations, and in this capacity as High Commissioner for Refugees. And Your Excellency, we're grateful you're here, and we want to provide you as much time as you need to give us a briefing, and I know that some of us will have questions and try to get you out of here at the appointed time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the panel. I want to thank you, first of all, for this opportunity to brief the panel, and to say I just came from the region, and the visit confirmed to me that the Syrian crisis is the most complex, the most dangerous, and with worst humanitarian consequences of all the conflicts I've seen since I started 8 years ago in this post. The numbers are clear. Since yesterday, 1.15 million refugees in the countries around, and even according to a statement of a member of the government, now 3.6 million displaced inside the country. And it's not only the present situation, it's the staggering escalation we are witnessing. In April, we had only registered 33,000 refugees. In December last year, 500,000, now more than the double. In December, every single day, 3,000 people crossed the border. In January, 5,000. In February, 8,000. In the last few weeks, there were days of 14,000 people fleeing Syria. And the response to this humanitarian catastrophic situation would not be possible without the generosity of the neighboring countries that have received all these Syrians and provided them with protection and assistance. Our advocacy has been centered in keeping the borders open. And I think that largely we were successful on that. There are some problems, and whenever there is a problem, we engage directly with the government and try to solve it as quickly as possible. But more than the numbers, what I believe matters here are the refugees themselves and the displaced people inside Syria themselves. Each one of them is a human tragedy. Most of the people have left having lost members of their family. Almost all of them have lost everything they possessed. And it is, when I visit these camps and I talk to people, there are two words that come to my mind. It is anger, but it is also the trauma that I feel. Anger, first of all, with the international community, that they can see that has not been able to stop this conflict. And trauma, we have the risk of a generation that is emerging fully traumatized by violence. And let's not forget that more than 3/4 of the people are women and children. And let's not forget, in particular, that children are the majority. And 1 in each 5 refugees coming to Jordan is less than 4 years old. Visiting schools and looking at the drawings, all the drawings are planes bombarding villages or people being killed by other people. I was visiting a family in Zatri camp just last week, and there was a boy of 4 years old that was permanently shooting with a gun during all my visit. And of course I referred to make sure that he would have the psychosocial support that he absolutely needs, because the level of trauma is indeed quite dramatic. And then, as it was said, there are harrowing reports of rape and sexual abuse to women and children in Syria. And unfortunately, when coming to the exile, we have to struggle with situations of family violence, with situations of sexual violence, and we have families that push their young women or girls into early marriage or prostitution. We are trying to build, together with our partners and with the support of the authorities, what we hope will be a robust capacity to both prevent and to address the plight of the victims in these situations. But these are indeed demonstrations also of the dramatic human tragedies that we are facing. Now, to respond to this situation, UNHCR has now about 2,000 people on the ground in 16 offices, and we have two essential missions. Outside the country, and in accordance with our mandate, we coordinate about 60 UN agencies, UNICEF, WFP, and a few others, and NGOs, together with the members of the Red Cross, Red Crescent family, and working very closely with governments in order to make sure that the adequate levels of protection and assistance are provided. In Turkey, as it was said, the government is itself dealing with most of the expenditure that corresponds to this situation. But in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Kurdistan, we are very strongly involved, together with our partners, from shelter to different relief items, from food to water and sanitation, from education to health, all the basic needs of this population in such a traumatic environment. Inside Syria, we still keep our mandate in relation to about 60,000 Iraqi refugees we are supporting, and a few Palestinians that came from Iraq. UNRWA deals with the dramatic situation of the Palestinian refugees in Syria, most of them already displaced inside the country, and some with problems in leaving the country. But inside Iraq, we are also part of a broad humanitarian family, namely within the UN framework, as one of the members of the team trying to assist the people displaced inside the country. And indeed, one of the most challenging questions that we are facing relates to the support to the people displaced in areas that are not controlled by the government. That is why we pioneered two huge convoys into the northern part of the country through cross lines, as we are not allowed to do cross-border. And we are now pushing as much as possible for the whole UN country team to do successive operations of this type. But let's also not forget, and I could witness that in Turkey, that more than 30 NGOs or coalitions of NGOs are doing cross-border support from Turkey. And what I believe is very important is to make sure, based on the principle that everybody should be supported wherever they are, whoever they support, whoever controls the territory where they are. What is needed is in all these operations to have, I would say, more support and better coordination, and that is why the Emergency Relief Coordinator, Valerie Amos, was in Turkey just after me in order to try to push for this more effective effort for the Syrian people inside the country, where the conditions are, I would say, worse than the conditions outside. If I may end my comments, what we are facing is a dramatic gap in resources. We were planning for 1.1 million refugees in June. We reached that in mid-March, but we are only funded by less than 30%, and I'm talking about all the organizations of the Refugee Response Plan that we coordinate, 60 as I mentioned. And it's impossible to go on. Many organizations will have to cease their activities, and we might need to restrict ourselves to core protection and to life-saving for the most vulnerable, which of course would be a tragedy. I know how difficult the situation is around the world. We had the Kuwait conference. It is not yet clear what will happen in its implementation. Until now, Kuwait has signaled that they want to channel their support to the multilateral organizations. In relation to the other Gulf donors from the Gulf, I have a clear impression that very little, if any, money will be channeled through the multilateral system, and that they will use their usual channels that are bilateral or through their own charities mainly. And so this will not be the game changer we all hoped for. That is the reason why, in addressing Parliament, I've been in Parliament for 25 years, and I know how difficult it is to be in Parliament when funding is a problem in general terms. But that's why, in addressing parliaments, I've been suggesting the possibility to consider that the Syrian situation has such a dimension, such a scale, to be looked separately from normal humanitarian aid budgets. Because with normal humanitarian aid budgets that exist around the world in the traditional donors, I don't think there is a chance to face a challenge of this dimension. And if this challenge is faced, probably we will be then in a dramatic situation, trying also to confront the Sudanese or South Sudanese, the Congolese, the Afghans, and all the others that are suffering similar situations, but with much less impact in the global media than the Syria one. Having said so, I want to express my very deep appreciation to the fact that the US has been our largest supporter, not only in relation to Syria, but to our operations worldwide. And without the US, it would have been absolutely impossible to come to where we are. We would have to give up long ago, and that would be a terrible tragedy. This is not only a humanitarian question. I do believe, looking at Lebanon, looking at the fragility of the Lebanese situation, more and more intensified in the recent past, looking at Iraq, even the Prime Minister said that Iraq might have a civil war because of what happens in Syria. Looking at Jordan, it's extremely difficult economic situation. The fact the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not solved nearby, the fact that we have a very sensitive area, the Gulf, some call the Arabian Gulf, some call the Persian Gulf, and the Strait of Hormuz. I think if this conflict is not stopped, there is a risk of spillover, and we could have an explosion in the Middle East that probably nobody would be able to cope with. And to support the victims is very important because of them, first of all, but it's also a factor that can contribute to stabilize the situation to the extent possible outside the country, and hopefully to create the conditions for one day these people to be able to go back home and to fight still something inside Syria. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much, Your Excellency. We appreciate not only the experience and hard work you're bringing to bear on these difficult issues, but the passion with which you approach them. I was struck by the statement you made earlier in your remarks about, quote, each one is a human tragedy, each person affected by the violence. I can't even begin to imagine the horror that these families have lived through. And I also appreciate the expression of gratitude that you enunciated. We appreciate that when our taxpayers, our citizens support efforts like this, that you express that gratitude. Speaking for myself, I think there's even more we can do, even if it's not dollars, which I hope we can provide, but more we can do in terms of better coordination, more of a focus, and trying to get better results. You identified a major problem, which you referred to as a gap in resources, and that's something we need to focus on. And you also talked about getting more support and better coordination, as I said. If you could identify right now for us that gap, is it a gap in resources that have been committed that haven't been delivered, or is it a gap in terms of the overall initial commitment, even setting aside the actual delivery of the support?
Looking at the refugee response plan, which the one we coordinate. On top of that, we have the operations inside Syria, of which we are a member, but we are not in the coordination. It's the emergency relief coordinator that assumes that function. The plan was foreseeing that in June we would have 1.1 million. And we made the calculations about the costs that corresponded to that. And we made an appeal. That appeal has been funded until now by less than 30% for all organizations involved, which means that we have a gap of about $700 million in relation to the pledges made, not in relation to cash. Just to give you the image of my organization, I have authorized the expenditure of $300 million. I have firm projections, which means cash plus pledges, plus amounts that we are convinced, because of the dialogue we have with governments, that we will receive. We have firm pledges plus cash plus firm projections that are less than 200 million, which means that, I mean, my choice is very simple. Do we do what we have to do and hope for the best, or do we stop and let people suffer in circumstances that, to be honest, I cannot assume? And so we are risking and hoping for the best. And we know that this crisis is such a dramatic crisis. It's not only a matter of generosity, it's a matter of enlightened self-interest. Nobody wants to see the Middle East explode. That would be a problem for the regional and global peace and security. So we are hopeful that there will be support to what it is being done. Now, we were expecting the Gulf to be a game changer, because the Gulf has never substantially supported multilateral organizations. Kuwait, as I said, has already said, their pledge would be channeled through the multilateral system, but our indications are that the same doesn't apply for the other countries. Whatever the US can do with other countries of the Gulf to make sure multilateral organizations, both UN, Red Cross, Red Crescent, NGOs, would be very much welcome, because indeed we are facing a very difficult situation because of the scale. And when one looks at the present trend, our work with the governments, I've been in dialogue with Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon. With all three governments, we are expecting to have, in the end of the year, 1 million refugees per country. And that, of course, represents a dramatic impact in the economies, in the societies, in the security of these countries.
So you're talking about 1 million refugees per country by the end of 2013?
If we maintain, if nothing happens, there is no solution, and if we maintain the present rhythm of outflows, that's where we are going to get. And this is, I mean, an unimaginable impact in the economy, the society, and the security of these countries. And what is, in my opinion, extremely important, looking at their generosity, is that they are ready to confront themselves with this reality in terms of contingency planning. But obviously, this represents a challenge that is unprecedented in the recent past.
Just want to make sure I understand. You're saying 1 million per, which countries?
Jordan has today 356, if I remember well, the numbers of yesterday. Jordan is receiving every day between 2,000 and 3,000. I was at the border Thursday. Jordan has a very good system of border control, and the border guards are heroic people. So based on their night vision systems, tower by tower, they detect where the refugees are coming, and with a few kilometers, because they are walking to the border. And then we went to the border to receive them, and they came, women, children, elderly people, 6 wounded by bullets. And I could see that then afterwards with the night Google, 2 villages, close to one village, some armored cars and mortars. There were 3 mortars that during our presence there exploded. I don't know exactly where. And we could see another village that is more in line with the opposition, from where some of these people were coming, namely the wounded. And every day we have 2,000 to 3,000 people crossing the border. Now 350,000 from now until the end of the year. Even if it is 2,000 per day, we still have probably almost 300 days to go, or 280 or something, times 2, 600,000 plus 350,000, we are in 1 million. And it's 2,000 to 3,000 a day. Lebanon is even more risky, because Lebanon is the way from Damascus. And in a battle for Damascus, Lebanon is the obvious escape. So we might have in Lebanon, that has already a 10% increase of the population, as it was rightly said by you, Mr. Chairman, we can have all of a sudden a major inflow. And Lebanon is the most fragile of the countries of the region. Turkey, of course, has another capacity. And Turkey, in a very generous way, you mentioned $600 million or $700 million that the Turkish government has spent itself. Turkey has another capacity, of course, but for Lebanon, we are facing an existential threat. The Syrian crisis represents an existential threat. And for Jordan, because of the fragility of the Jordanian economy, this is indeed something that deserves a massive solidarity of the international community. We don't ask only for support to humanitarian organizations. I think it is very important that the governments of the countries around that are in the first line of protection of the international community against the Syrian crisis do receive all the solidarity they deserve.
Thank you for that. I'll try to get back to more. Senator Johnson.
Well, first of all, Mr. High Commissioner, thank you for all your efforts and for your testimony. Obviously, the humanitarian aid is incredibly important, and we support it. But let's face it, it's the Band-Aid. The cure is to getting rid of the Assad regime. Your comment, I wrote it down, staggering escalation of the refugee problem, doesn't indicate a metric that we're getting close to the inevitability of the regime falling. I hear a lot of talk that this is going to be inevitable, but is it? I mean, is the Assad regime inevitable to fall, or could they be there for years?
Well, I do not have a crystal ball, and I'm not supposed to make comments on political issues because of my mandate, even if I haven't been in politics for 25 years of my life, and so, as you can imagine. And I recognize that there is no humanitarian solution for this problem. Let's be clear. I mean, we can alleviate the plight of people, but the solution needs to be a political solution. My feeling, if I am to give a feeling, and when we do contingency planning, we need to look into several scenarios. My feeling is that this could last with situations not very different from what we have now, but with a permanent degradation of the living conditions inside the country, because many of the things are falling apart. Educational system, health system, even basic services. These could last still for a large period. Whether it is months or years, I don't know. Nobody knows. But we can face a situation where it lasts, and we can also move from the present situation to a situation of chaos, for which we also have to be prepared. We might have refugees of different natures. If you look at the present pattern of refugees, they are essentially Sunni Muslims. But one day we could have a situation with the minorities. That is, of course, also of great concern to us all. So we need to be prepared for things to get worse before they eventually will get better.
Okay, so again, to summarize, I mean, you're feeling from the ground there is nothing inevitable right now. I mean, we just simply don't know what's going to happen. I mean, we're not seeing any inevitability here.
I am someone that believes in a positive outcome of history, and I hope for a positive outcome of history. Sure. But I think that it might take some time.
Okay. Obviously, we're concerned of who, if the regime falls, who would replace them. We certainly want that group to be friendly to America. We certainly want to be friendly to them. We want to support the citizens of Syria. My concern, because I've heard reports of potentially growing resentment of Syrians, that they certainly understand that America has the military capability to potentially bring this conflict to an end, but we're not doing anything. Do you get that same sense? Are we falling in Syrians' opinion because we're not doing more from a military standpoint?
Well, I don't think, as I said, in my contacts with the people, what I feel is that the people believe that the international community as a whole should come together and should find a solution. I don't think they identify a specific country or blame whoever for whatever purpose. But there is this frustration. That situation is going on and on and on, and the international community is not able to find a solution for it. That is what I felt is the anger that I witness when I discuss with people. And they see me also as a representative of the international community, and sometimes they don't make easily the distinction between what is a strictly humanitarian work and what it is also a political involvement. And even when I try to explain, well, this is, I can understand your feeling, but this is not what I can provide. What I can provide is just some support to alleviate your plight. As I said, sometimes it's not easy to explain to people.
Sure. So you sense a growing resentment on part of Syrians against the international community in general. Do you get a sense that America's involvement help is known at all?
Or
limited?
I have no doubt that, all these people, we are not, this is not similar to, I would say, a crisis in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and we are having one, by the way, in which tens of thousands of people cross the border to Uganda. These are people that have mobile phones. They listen to the news. They know what's in the internet. Our convoy, our first convoy that went to the northern part of Syria, I saw it in the YouTube, and it was put in the YouTube by the Free Syrian Army. And I heard the general that was accompanying them explaining what he was doing, which means that people know what's happening. And so I believe that the effort that the US is making, namely what has been recently announced, and is perfectly known by the people. That doesn't mean that everybody likes or dislikes this or that thing, but I don't think this is one of the most well-informed, politicized, and engaged, to a certain extent, refugee communities I've ever seen.
Well, that actually leads me exactly to my next line of questioning here. I certainly totally agree with Senator Boxer in terms of her concern about what's happened to young women, to children. I mean, the horrors of war. I want to talk about how do we get that information out? How do we publicize it? I mean, I certainly understand the power of the social media and internet, but is there a really coordinated effort, a documentary? Is Al Jazeera on board with this? I mean, what are the media outlets? I mean, how are we truly trying to get this information out so that we can galvanize the world community, quite honestly, to help fill that funding gap? Truthfully, I don't see that information all that well publicized, all that well known here in America.
There were recently 3 very important reports from the IRC, from UNICEF, from Save the Children. I believe there are others being prepared. And I have to say, again, these are things that are discussed in the Arab media. We follow the Arab media carefully because, as you can imagine, it's vital to have a positive attitude towards the refugees. And there is a perfect conscience of the dramatic situation inside Syria. If there is conscience of something even more than the situation of the refugees, is of the situation inside Syria. Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya, most of the other Arab channels have permanent debates, permanent news, permanent images coming from the inside, and as you can imagine, with extremely, extremely tough testimonies.
Okay, thank you, Mr. High Commissioner.
Thanks, Senator Johnson. I know we have to allow you to leave because we told you to be out of here sooner, and I'll take responsibility for that. Just one final question. In terms of I realize the funding gap is obviously of great concern, but let's set aside that for just for purposes of this question. Assuming you have the resources, or that's not an issue, but even just apart from that, what's the most difficult challenge you have dealing with humanitarian crisis at this scale and not having the kind of help you would hope because of the limitations you have with, in this case, a host country so you have to figure out other means to get aid there. What's the biggest kind of mechanical or on-the-ground challenge that you have?
I think the biggest challenge has to do with the fact that this population, that, as I said, is highly informed, relatively politicized, will become much more angry than what I've said, and the risks of conflict with host communities will dramatically increase. And this can be a very disturbing factor, and something that will be another element in increasing the risks of spillover of the conflict that I believe are still there. If one looks at how closely linked are the situations of Syria and Lebanon in the past and in the present, what we see in Iraq, the fragility of other countries in the region, I do believe that humanitarian aid, effective humanitarian aid in this moment, is not only a moral obligation to the people that is in need, it's also a factor to help these move into the right direction and to help that today's Syria might be, as we all wish, a normal country and not a failed state or a country that is disaggregated or where it is very difficult to establish normal democratic institutions.
Your Excellency, we're grateful for your presence here and the briefing and taking our questions, and especially appreciate the commitment that you've made as High Commissioner. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.